Hello flower friends! I thought it would be fun today to show you what I have growing in my hoop house. It is late May here and I'm in Zone 8B in Southwest British Columbia, Canada, which is a part of the Pacific Northwest. And I am growing a lot of things in my hoop house this year for a particular wedding that is actually next week. So I have focused in here on a lot of cold hardy annuals, early annuals that I can get out while it's still quite cold. In fact, it's often still freezing, to grow in here and have them ready early in time for this wedding. So it's been a really fun experience trying to hit a specific date. It's actually not something that I do very often, and I don't often take on weddings, especially a wedding of this size. So it's actually been really fun trying to time all my crops and see what I could pull off. And I've actually been fairly successful with a lot of what I've done, so I can't wait to show you. So without further ado, you can see I've got a lot going on in here. And just so that it makes a bit of sense, the front half of most of this hoop house, this bed, the first bed, the second bed, and the fourth bed are actually other things. There were overwintered foxgloves in my first bed that I planted last summer because I just wanted to put them somewhere and I didn't have a permanent spot ready for them, and I just wanted them to be on my drip irrigation so I didn't have to water them and keep those little seedlings alive all summer. So the first bed was kind of a happy accident because the foxgloves are blooming right now in time for this wedding. The second bed, same story, but with delphiniums, overwintered, and these have actually been pumping out blooms now since Mother's Day. I've had a lot of delphiniums that I was able to send out for Mother's Day bouquets that were in my last video. And the last bed is actually my strawberry patch in the front. So just so it's clear, I've got about the back half of this hoop house is more where I've been focused on growing. So we're just gonna go have a look and go bed by bed, and I'll try to cram as many little tips in here that are relevant to each particular flower as I can. First off, I have my foxgloves. Now, I started growing these varieties of foxgloves because they are said to be true perennials and short-lived perennials rather than biennials. And you know I'm all about perennials that I can just plant and rely on them for at least a few years. So the foxgloves here, the yellow one is called, it's not a very exciting name, it's called Giant Yellow. And it's a beautiful, soft, lemony yellow. And then this one behind me is a strawberry foxglove. And you can see they kind of ramble behind me and go into this next section. Now these foxgloves, I'm trying to let them ripen as much as I can before I harvest them so that I get as much show in the top portion of the buds for this wedding. That being said, I did harvest some this morning just because these lower buds are starting to get pollinated, and once they get pollinated they actually fall off. So it's kind of a tricky balancing act as to when exactly I want to harvest and hold these, but I'm a week out now for this wedding, and they do last a long time. So I had some that I decided to just harvest them. And there are some variation in size. So these tall ones are going to be more for the arrangements, the larger pieces. And I also have some smaller ones. You can see here, this smaller yellow one, which are more dainty and are going to be the perfect size for some of the handheld bouquets and things like that. So as mentioned, in behind the foxgloves, I have my sweet pea crop. Now this crop is slightly less successful. I have had in the past sweet peas ready much earlier, where I'm harvesting swaths of blooms by mid-May. In this case, I think what's happened is that I planted other things in this hoop house that are more heat sensitive, like Ranunculus, as you'll see, and the poppies, as you'll see. And so I've been venting the greenhouse a lot more, which means I'm rolling up the sides all day from early in the morning, trying not to get it too hot in here and just to keep this greenhouse at a daytime temperature in earlier spring of, say, maybe 15 degrees, 18 degrees Celsius. So now it's actually warmer than that, of course, because it's warmer than that outside. But I think what that did is delay my sweet my sweet pea crop compared to what I've had in the past, because I think in the past when I've had sweet peas that early, it's because I was basically not venting a greenhouse. So in hindsight or in reflection, I should have planted these sweet peas in my other hoop house so that I could have had more of warm temperatures in that one just to accelerate these. That being said, I am seeing the buds happening and I'm seeing enough here that will be ready in the next few days. And in particular, the one that I'm really excited, which is this section here, is a sweet pea that is a peach pink. It's like a soft peach called Piggy Sue. And I just counted this morning and it looks like I'm gonna have at least 20 stems that I'll be able to harvest in a few days. So thankfully, they're gonna be ready just in time. And another interesting thing about the sweet peas that I've noticed in all of my sweet peas this year, and maybe I've never just noticed this before, but a lot of them seem like they aborted their initial flush. So I have a lot of them where they sent out these buds and then they've just kind of like dried up and turned yellow. I'm actually not sure what that is, and I don't know if that's something that my sweet peas do every year and I've just never noticed because I'm not watching them so closely. So if anyone happens to know what that's about, I'd love to hear from you. Down at my feet, at the base of my sweet peas, I planted some pansies. These are antique shades. And I also just have on the other side some basic like sweet Swiss giant pansies that I just happen to have in the house when I wanted to start seeds. And I'm wheeling these guys upwards. They are finally starting to stretch. And I actually stopped picking them a couple of weeks ago. And what I'm seeing, because in my research, I've never grown pansies, by the way, for cut flowers. This is my first time. They've been flowering for weeks and weeks, and I've been picking off the buds, the blooms for weeks and weeks to encourage more flowering. And at this point, I had this sort of instinct that I needed to just let them stay on there and just lengthen, and it seems to be working. I mean, I'd say this one is probably 10 inches tall. So I am gonna get at least a few precious stems that I can at least tuck into some of the arrangements. Maybe in a week from now, they'll have even taller stems and maybe I can sneak some into what I hope for, which is the bridal bouquets and the bridesmaids bouquets, but I'm not sure, we'll see. I mean, it is still pretty early in the season, I think, for these to really lengthen out. And then we're going into the next bed now. So this is some annual Bachelor buttons. This is one called QIS Black or Black Night or Dark Night or something like that. I will put it up in the drop down. Not much to say about these except that for this wedding, I'm not harvesting how I normally might, which is to cut way down at the base of the stem. Because each stem that comes up is multi-branching, it has multiple blooms, I'm right now harvesting these stems just long enough, like just low enough down the stem to get a long enough stem for what I want, but leaving some of the additional stems to then ripen so that I could get even more. And the other thing is I don't normally grow these. There's so much work for what you get for the size. It's not something that I normally bother with growing, but for this wedding, I knew that they would be ready nice and early, and it's going to just be that little accent and that little bit of the dark color that I want to go with some of the peachy, softer tones. And one more note on the Bachelor buttons is that netting is critical for these, absolutely critical. I've tried to grow them without netting. I don't recommend it. Next, I have Calendula. The Calendula is doing quite famously. And I actually have lots of stems that are in my cooler already. I've been harvesting already of these for weeks. I find the Calendula holds up really well out of water, the flower itself. So I'm looking forward to using these in some of the more wearable pieces, the personals. And right now I'm just letting them bloom out because there's multiple buds on each stem. And because they last so long, they don't really, once they ripen, they don't really fall apart right away. So I'm hoping to get multiple open blooms per stem. So I'm just letting these develop more before I harvest any of these ones. Okay, here's another one. This is another new to me flower. This is Godetia. And I just grew it just to see what would happen. I didn't know if it would be ready in time. As you can see, I do have buds forming, but I don't think this one is going to be blooming in time. I really need to be harvesting by maybe Monday or Tuesday at the latest next week. So in about 4 to 5 days. And I'm not really seeing signs of blooming yet on these. One note on the Godetia, I pinched them, which sent up a lot more stems, but I forgot to net them. And some of them have been falling over and I'm getting some wonky stems. So I would recommend netting this one, at least if growing in a hoop house the way I am with what I'm seeing. I'll definitely try this one again. It's really easy to grow and I'm excited to work with it, but just probably not in time for this wedding. These are volunteer sweet peas. So you can see they are actually blooming. So I've let them go just as a backup, but it's not actually the exact color that I'm wanting. This is Janet Scott, though, by the way, it's one of my favorite sweet peas and tends to have nice long stems, beautiful fragrance, nice and early flowering sweet pea. In behind me, you can see the blue spires of Delphiniums. So again, these are overwintered and I'm harvesting as they're ready. So I harvest when there's about a third of the individual blooms open and there's still lots of nice, well-formed buds to give a nice long vase life. In the vase, they open up starting from the bottom. So you do want some buds. So I'm harvesting them down at the base of the plant, hopefully encourage more growth and potentially another flush of blooms. I haven't netted these Delphiniums, but I have corralled them with sisal. Otherwise, the weight of these huge blooms, once they start to open, will tend to cause them to flop right over. This brings me to the next bed, bed number 3, and the first couple feet of this bed were direct sown Nigella. You can see that it wasn't a super successful crop for me. They're also not blooming yet. Potentially, if I would have sown them in the fall, which I wasn't able to do, this might have a different result, but that's how it's worked out for me in the hoop house. And fairly spotty germination, whether or not they just dried out easily because they are in the hoop house. It does get warmer. Not sure, but I did keep the soil covered until I saw germination to help keep the moisture in. All right, in next behind me are Ranunculus. These Ranunculus were pre-sprouted in 2 different successions back in February. I think maybe late January was the first one, and then they were planted out here late February to early March. You can see I'm having some issues with them. They're definitely slowing down. This is still a crop that I'm learning to grow well, and I'm seeing potentially maybe some powdery mildew at this stage. So not much more to say. I have harvested some beautiful stems that I have storing in my cooler for this wedding, but not as good success on this crop as I really need for such an expensive corm. So we'll give it another whirl. I'm not always one to give up on some of these crops, especially the ones that can potentially be blooming for me in time for early season sales like Mother's Day. All right, the next one is Icelandic poppies. It's a completely new to me crop as well. And this crop has me rather smitten. I planted roughly 72 seedlings out here, and they have been cranking out the blooms for a week. I'm getting really good stem length right now on these, which I assume will keep happening as long as it doesn't get too hot and slow them down. And yeah, they're just really fun. I did not need 72 plants though. I have over 400 poppy stems saved up in the cooler, which is mostly just from the last couple of weeks. So that's a lot more than I really need for this wedding, but I'm really looking forward to using these for the wedding. They're harvested basically in bud stage. I'm looking for a little tiny bit of color in the crack area, but yeah, they're harvested like this. And then the nice thing is, if they don't open in time for me, I can even peel off the outer layer here. It can be peeled off and basically the poppy can be forced open in time for the wedding that I need it for. And they are giving me several days in the vase, which is enough reliable time for me to be able to make my designs, make my arrangements in advance, and have them hold that bloom for long enough for the wedding. So this has been a really fun one, and I highly recommend this one. It's just a very cool flower, gorgeous floaty stems, totally in style, totally on trend with garden flowers right now. Next up, I'm in the best smelling part of the hoop house. This corner is filled with various successions of stalks. Now, I have struggled to grow very nice stalks now for 4 or 5 years. I think this is my 5th year trying to grow these. And this is the first year that I've finally managed to grow stalks that I would consider to be commercial quality grade stalks that I would be proud to sell to a florist. I don't always stick with a crop this long if it's a finicky type crop, but stalks have long been one of my all-time favorite cut flowers. So here, these soft spires are iron apricot. This pinky color here is Stock's Antique Rose, and this one here behind me is Cat's Cherry Blossom. So you can see I have actually 3 different strains of stalks, and they've all performed equally well in terms of the length and quality and multiple florets on a bloom. I actually don't have a breakdown on how many singles I got per type, but I will just as easily use these singles in the wedding work that I'm doing. They are still beautiful. So I've been picking from this patch. As you can see, it's rather sparse. These are planted about 3 inches apart. So I've been picking now for a couple of weeks and storing in my cooler. But the nice thing about stalks is that they hold a really long time on the plant. They slowly ripen. So I've been allowing these ones to ripen up fully, and I'm basically just picking them when I see that there's only a few more buds left here at the top. Especially as I get closer to this wedding, I feel confident and comfortable that I'll have all of these stalks to work with, and they're not just gonna go overripe quickly as you would have with other flowers. And as I mentioned, I did do various successions. I think I did 6 successions of stalks, and there was a slight difference in when they were ripening. So the one at the back, the Cat's Cherry Blossom, was my first succession. It beat the other ones, but only ever so slightly. And you can see that there still are some of those left that were slower to ripen. Meanwhile, I've been harvesting these other varieties. So the succession sowing didn't really make a huge difference. They're all sort of coming relatively at the same time. Now, one of the keys with growing stalks is that they really tend to bolt when they get stressed. If they get too warm, they tend to bolt. So one of the big things that I've had to learn is to get them going, get them germinated, get them pricked out into trays, and then get them outside quickly. Like when they only have maybe 5 or 6 leaves on the plant, they need to be outside. They need to get transplanted as soon as possible, just to give them enough cold weather to grow in. So the other thing is netting is super important, especially here in the hoop house, which is going to give even longer stems. And I have grown stalks where they've all fallen over as well. So the netting is super important to just keep those stems upright and actually have harvestable quality stalks. All right, last but not least for cold hardy annuals are the Snapdragons. So you can see I have a fairly large patch of Snapdragons. They are all coming along relatively at the same time, but in terms of this wedding, my earlier successions and the earlier varieties are looking to be the Chantilly Snapdragons. So I started those first, and they are sown in, I have white and I have a light salmon. These are definitely going to beat some of the other ones that I planted. I also planted Costa, and the Chantillies are definitely the ones that are going to be ready and beautiful and full in their bloom in the next few days when I need to harvest them just in time for the wedding. But you can see behind me the amount of buds. These are all coming up pretty quickly and relatively at a similar time. I don't like to pinch my snaps. I planted these really close, 3 to 4 inches apart, and I don't like to pinch them. I find that pinched flowers are just smaller and wimpier. So what you're seeing is the initial first bloom on a thicker stem, and I get a nicer, more robust flower doing it that way. So that's just what I like. I don't know if that's just my climate and those pinched ones just aren't getting the right situation to grow in. I don't know, but I've never really liked pinched snaps. So these are all just individual plants behind me. So I hope that was interesting and you picked up a few tips on some of these crops. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. And I look forward to seeing you again as I put together all these wedding flowers, and I'm going to try to take you along and show you some of the things that I end up making for that. And yeah, I will catch you later. Thanks for watching.